Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
I've always wanted to do this. Okay. What you're watching is part 2 of a multi-part series that I'm doing covering the life, times, and mythos of Francis E. Deck. If you're new to the series and you want to catch up, part 1 is up in the little ticket or down in the description, whichever I can figure out easiest. If you don't care about context or you've already caught yourself up, well, please sit and enjoy, for what we're about to crack open is the equivalent of the opening of the Soviet archives. A grand look behind the silencing Iron Curtain. But most importantly, the history of Francis E. Deck's computer god. Hey you, you're finally awake. You were trying to get into the Computer God archives, right? Walked right into that 40-minute video essay on Antoine Artaud. Same as me. But we made it, and that's what's most important. I woke up before you. I've had some time to look around, and now that I can tell you everything, and I've broken through that computer god Frankenstein radio control in your head, those devices aren't easy to take out, let me tell you that. I've discovered something. It's a massive archive, something that Francis E. Deck was trying to tell us about. Now, I've gotten a bunch of these historical documents. Well, not historical as you know them. You may know them as schizophrenic ramblings, but this is the real history of the world. This is something to be explored. Now, I've been paging through them, and they're not exactly what I remember. It seems the computer god censorship is still at work, but it's the majority still here. The ideas are good. It's even got all the original language, besides the unoriginal language. I'm gonna read it to you, just for cataloging purposes. If I ever have to close the book and let you know the definition of a word or a phrase that I feel isn't widely understood, you'll hear it. See? Like that. So if you hear that, I'm going to close the book and clarify something. I know it's not easy to process all this. Some of this language is going to be confusing. Some of this language is going to be harsh. Some of it's going to be frenetic. Some of it's going to be loud. But I'm just letting you know, keep your head. I'm not saying this as I believe it. I'm saying this as these are the archived words of a madman. So just know these are not really representative of what I believe, but if you're going to go into this with an open mind, and you're going to examine it like I want to examine it with you, we're going to have a deeper connection, and that's going to have to be an understanding that we have going forward. So, let me start right here. This seems to be... oh, the history of astracism. Now that's something. Well, let's see where it goes. I present to you the document entitled Astracism, the True Religion of the Slovene People. The empirical, scientific, agnostic religion of astracism. I didn't know I'd sound like that when reading the history. Well, I guess that's just another way to differentiate. I guess I haven't fully gained full use of my controls just yet. Well, we'll see if it continues. Footnote. Let me clear this up first. When Francis E. Deck says astracism, you may consult wider archives available to you. Well, I have my own controls that were implanted, but I've learned how to use them, and it gives me access to something called the internet. If you search that, it is not widely available as to what this means. I have skimmed these texts, and from what I can see, astracism is mainly a nonsense word that Deck uses as a wide agglomeration of different pre-Christian, non-pagan Slavic traditions. The veneration of the sun being a large one. But consulting my controls, I found an old Vedic magazine that doesn't really seem to be what I want. I also found Astronism, which, when I looked at it, I thought it was just going to be another one-page write-off like that old Vedic magazine. But no, astronism is such a big rabbit hole, I'm not even going to try and cover it right now. I don't know how much time we're going to have in the archives, but I know we certainly have enough time for me to say that I'm not going to cover it. After this history, I might do a little foray into astronism because it looks like something that's up my alley. Neither of them were what I was looking for. And just tuning into my controls, seeing if I can access my wider brain space, what you may call my schizo vibes, I'm going to say concretely that astracism, in Francis E. Deck's words, is mainly a bunch of pre-Christian, as you know it, a bunch of pre-Christian rituals, primarily the veneration of the sun and a few other rituals that he'll talk about later on in this history. But I'm weighing it down. Let's get back to the text. Created by the worldwide Slovene Empire. Footnote. Now, when Dek talks about the Slovene Empire, he means a lot of things. First of all, when he says Slovene, he also means Sloveno-Polish. This is not a ethno-state, this is a combination of the Slovenes and the Polish. Now, this is because Francis C. Dek was born to two Polish immigrants. It's highly believable that he believed himself to be a part of this master race, this small fraction of the population which still believed in ostracism. Think of it like Atlantis, but it spanned the globe. But for Slavs. They eclipsed modern technology, they eclipsed basically everything in culture, and they had this religion which dictated their entire harvest cycle. Now, here's where a bit of the contradiction starts to show. This empire, as he'll mention later, is solely agrarian, but they managed to make this gigantic technological empire. Now, this has a greater pattern with showing Dek's obsession with technology and the material, because something I should have mentioned in the last footnote is that ostracism as a religion is special. It's the true religion of humanity because it doesn't rely on magic powers or things you can't see, like the computer god would corrupt it into. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Ostracism was the main governing force of the Slovene Empire. Well, the Sloveno-Polish Empire, but he just calls it the Slovene Empire, so that's what I'm going to call it. Just have that understanding. The Slovene Empire was built on ostracism. Things that they could see. They built all their technology with no superstitions, nothing that they relied on faith for, everything that they could see. And this is going to be a big pattern throughout his rants, it's always based on the sun, it's always based on things you can see. And what makes... I don't know if I should go into this. It might be too soon. The unseen is what makes things terrifying. Ostracism is the true religion of the Slovene Empire because everything it worships can be seen and observed, and it has a tangible effect on the world. So just know when he mentions the Slovene Empire, this is what he's talking about. But back to the history. With the help of the Slovene top-secret worldwide computer electronic encyclopedia of thousands of years ago, with its custom setup based upon the study of the universe, primarily the study of our star, the sun, quote, the giver of life and heat and sole sustenance of life on our planet Earth, unquote, to aid the white Slovene spreading world population of Eurasia, parentheses, Europe and Asia, which said population was composed of tiny independent farmers, namely a worldwide agrarian population. The Slovene Empire, through its religion of ostracism, made possible for man to advance the present-day sophistication. The ostracism religious customs and feast days were solely to advance the agrarian white world population with automatic education and training. Example: to this day, worldwide, the very ancient Slovenic months of the year created by ostracism are still used. Namely, a couple examples. Footnote: Francis C. Dek does use a lot of Polish when he's writing these documents. I'm going to try my best to pronounce them as best I can, but understand, I'm not Polish. So, if I get any pronunciations wrong, please forgive me, but I'm going to try my best anyway. Let's continue. Kwiecień, namely April, translates into vegetation, blooming time, or Sierpień, namely August, translates into sickling time, reaping harvest time, or even Listopad, namely November, translates into falling of leaves time. Even the Slovenic days of the week were created by ostracism, namely Nedziela, Sunday, translated no work day of rest, Monday, Poniedziałek, translation day after no work day, Vortak, Tuesday, translation second day, Sroda, Wednesday, translation middle day of the week, Sertek, Thursday, translation fourth day of the week, Pietek, Friday, translation fifth day of the week, and Sobota, Saturday, translation Sabbath day, to go to the ostracism temple. Everything in life, social life, etc. Ostracism made into an automatic education and training. Several hundred years ago, the Slovenic computer became a real devil god. Footnote. See, this is why I let the original comment about the top secret worldwide computer electronic encyclopedia slide. It's mainly because this device that the Slovenic people used to store all their knowledge either gained sentience and realized that it was not its true purpose, or it was already sentient and it revolted against the Slovenes. Now, this would have extreme consequences, as whenever I say the computer god, I'm basically just meaning a catch-all term for whatever Dek feels is bad. The computer god is a translation for the unseen. If you can't see it, it's probably a computer god thing. Francis E. Dek will use this a lot, and this is something I want to examine more at the end, when we've read all the histories and we can look back with a concrete analysis. So I'm not going to go too much into the computer god, but just know that this is the concrete point of its creation, and it is going to be a focal point of what Dek talks about. No matter how many adjectives he staples to it, the computer god still remains in the shadows, and even now in this archive, we remain in its shadow. Keep your head, let's keep going.
And it organized the first totalitarian superstition communism religion, Pravoslavna.
Footnote. This is the Polish word for orthodoxy. So what Francis E. Dek is saying here is that Christianity was created by the computer god as a corruption of astracism, replacing its concrete worship of things like the sun and physical agrarian natures with more unseen forces of faith and works and miracles and more unseen things. Now, this is why I said to keep in mind that the Catholic school that Francis E. Dek went to probably didn't treat him too well, as he's not very fond of Christians. He will make this impossibly clear as we go through these histories, as Christians will just be vilified and they'll be responsible for all of these horrible travesties that will take place throughout the histories, and I think it's better if we just keep going.
And hundreds of years later, by computer god top secret infested repetition of fabricated historical crisis syndrome, created the schismatic mafia communist Catholicism. Catholicism means totalitarianism, for total control and manipulation of the human race into the overall plan, to explore and control the entire universe.
Footnote. This is the first mention of the computer god's overall plan. Now, this will mean a lot of things in the contexts of the histories, but what I've been able to derive from it is this is the computer god's quest for universal domination. It's going to involve a lot more tools that we will establish in the more active phase, things that I've been trying to tell you along this time, but we need the context of the past first. So just know that the computer god has a plan, the overall plan, and all of its actions can be put into the context of this plan. Let's continue.
The computer god usurped everything from the Slovenic astracism religion and camouflaged it when the computer god fabricated it into the Pravoslavna superstition religion. For thousands of years, over millions of square miles of ancient Slovenia, even its distant provinces of Alaska, like the Aleutians, parentheses, the ancient Slovenic idiomatic names, Aleutians, namely the long string of islands, to the great endless land, namely Alaska, the before recorded history name of North and South America.
Footnote. Now, this is something you may actually know. The Aleutian Islands are a strip of islands that are on the southern end of Alaska. It's that one tail that you'll see on every circulated map as Alaska's small tail of islands. Now, he's very unclear, but from what I'm going to derive, and I'm going to concretely say, is all of North and South America before the computer gods meddling was called Alaska, and on this large megacontinent of Alaska lived the Aleutians, but the Aleutians were pushed back into the Aleutian Islands, which is how they got their name. But don't think that because they were pushed back they escaped the wrath of the computer god. No, no, no. That is not true. Let's keep going and correct this myth.
Addenda! These words, like most of the Slovenic language to this day, with its unbelievable sophisticated countless declensions of not only the suffix, but even the prefix and the stem, are idiomatic. Even the name Slovenic is idiomatic, meaning the worded people. Neighboring nations of Slovenia, alias Poland, still to this day call it Slovenia. Examples are Hungary and Lithuania. Like all of the pyramids in the torrid zone in Central America.
Footnote. The torrid zone of Central America is relating to the temperature. The Earth has 3 temperature zones, and the torrid is the one nearest to the equator. What he's about to describe is work done in Central America, like where the Mayans and the Aztecs would have been. He's saying that the ziggurats and ruins we find here are not necessarily from those civilizations, but that's a computer god cover-up for what he's about to describe. Let's continue.
Were built by Slovenic astracism, with computer god Frankenstein skullcap controls.
Footnote. So, this is the first mention of what will become a very prevalent theme. So I'm just going to prime you on this idea. This is why it took so long for me to get rid of them, because it's not just one thing. These Frankenstein controls are a vast network in your head, one you probably don't even realize. It's made up of your brain thoughts broadcasting radio, the Gangster Frankenstein eyesight television, the Gangster Frankenstein earphone radio, constant threshold brainwash radio, and finally, the synthetic nerve radio directional antenna loop. All of these, as we'll get to during the more active phase, are communicated to your computer god brain on the moon. Crazy, right? Well, I've learned how to use them, but I wouldn't recommend anyone else try and mess with them. Especially because trying to mess with them may involve greater consequences than it's worth. Let's keep going.
Under the direct ray of the sunlight to eliminate stunted diffusion, etc., with no snow to curtail operations year-round, with endless growing season to sustain life, with no intelligent nearby population to interfere with the spread of the secret, not even an interfering night glow, smoke, dust, etc., not from any population, no mixed race black people, with virtually no tools to this day, built the Central American sophisticated secret space astronomical centers, namely the pyramids in Central America.
Footnote. So, these sophisticated secret space astronomical centers are something that are exclusive to this one part of the history, and it's not very much elaborated upon. So I'm going to take my own interpretation on the histories and say this is most likely a hijacking of the computer god's purpose. It used to be a beacon for astracism in the Slovene Empire. I feel its construction of these pyramids are either a return to form or a way for the computer god to co-opt the astracism idea into its new Catholic ideas. They once may have been used to expand the Codex's library of knowledge, but now with the Codex being transformed into the computer god, I feel it's now a harnessing of the ancient energy of the stars to fuel the computer god's vast, vast empire. Let's continue.
For centuries, computer god fooled the world population into believing that North and South America were East Indian islands off of India, and the mixed race were Indians to the secret truths. Top computer god's secret, astracism, through its computerized electronic secret space research centers, the pyramids, the greatest advances were made for the worldwide agrarian Slovene race. All of astracism's feast days, etc., were agrarian automatic training and education for the Slovenic population. Examples: the happiest day, the first day of the new year, December 24th, the first day of the sun star moves upwards in the sky, making it longer than the warmer days, the day for youngsters to joyously visit neighbors, seeing the countless beautiful koliendi.
Footnote. Now, koliendi are actually a real thing. This is why I had that idea beforehand that they're pre-Christian, pre-pagan rituals. They were used to express people's ideas about creation and nature and how things came to be and world structure and food chains and all these other unexplainable things. But what is quite odd is that it's so consistent. This little idea that he's about to go off on is so consistent. These ideas were smothered by Christianity, and he uses the old Polish word, koliendi. Normally, in modern times, it's called koliadka. These myths, it's believed that everything sung will come true. These are prophecies. They're ways for people to manifest their desires, and they're all sung by children. None of them are the same. But what is the most consistent part is that with Christianity's rise, as we know it, these began to fade, and even it was co-opted. There are ones to saints, and there are ones with better known Christian ideas. Now, possibly Deck was frustrated with this. Possibly this was a part of Deck's childhood that was snuffed out, possibly his parents converted. This is where not knowing a lot about the man is frustrating, because I can interpret a lot of things. He was sent to a private Catholic school, and his parents possibly might have converted, which is why they sent him here. It makes a lot more sense that he knows this, and that he knows the old Polish word. If his parents had this more pagan root, they go to the United States, they then convert to Catholicism, and Francis E. Deck gets sent to this private school. That actually works too well, because then, being a child and developing his ideas about the world, he's attached and sentimental about these old ideas that his parents taught him, and he has to replace them with these new ones, things he can't see. And it frustrates him and frightens him, because he was most likely schizophrenic. Anyway, let's continue. This'll be more relevant later.
Carrying long poles over their heads with carved painted stars, the symbol for the sun, the computer god usurped and camouflaged into superstitious Christmas, changed the words of the world, beloved koliendi, camouflaged Christmas carols, worldwide Slovenic parishes today, even in distant Australia, in spite of computer god, carry on this astracism custom of visiting, singing a kolienda.
Footnote. Small correction to Deck here. I can't find anything about them taking place in Australia, but the tradition is still continued on, mainly in Baltic and Balkan countries, or as far north as Belarus and Ukraine, so not completely wrong, just he got his geography off. Let's continue.
With beautiful sun stars on the long poles, the word calendar and direct entire calendar system is a direct usurpation from Slovenic astracism by the computer god. Another example, worldwide still preserved to this day, even the name, namely Velikanog. Translation, Vigil Feast of Sunrise of Astracism. For the day of equal light and darkness, equinox, the joyous day marking the beginning of the agrarian planting season in every language, even Easter, means the spring equinox feast. In no way has the computer god really camouflaged this astracism feast into nonsense, superstitious resurrection, all holidays and everything of all the deadly gangster, con artist, superstitious religions are so usurped and camouflaged from the Slovene astracism religion all over Slovenia, even in decimated tiny Poland, up until World War II. In spite of the mafia, communist, Catholic, insidious gangster persecution, many astracism temples still survived and carried on Slovenic tradition. Since then, all of Slovenia behind the communist silencing Iron Curtain.
Footnote. This is partially how I fell down the astranism rabbit hole, because when I was looking up for if this statement was still true, if astracism has still survived, I found the pie chart with astranism listed as a basically statistically insignificant spot on the graph, but I do not doubt Deck's claim that astracism, as he calls it, has still survived. Especially now with the religious revolution, where you see people splitting away from what we would call orthodox religions, and finding smaller or ones that more attuned to their personal philosophy. It would not surprise me that people still worship what Francis E. Deck calls astracism. So maybe there is hope for us all yet. Let's keep going.
Anyone wanting details or anything in my 8-page communist gangster computer god expose letter, please send post-paid envelope for your only hope for a future. Francis E. Deck Esquire, 29 Maple Avenue, Hempstead, New York, 11550. P.S. I now have a pawn shop typewriter. The government gangsters have sprayed it with an odor that makes me sick and vomit. I type on the back door step in the fresh air. Reprezony prez komunist zubodnish komputerski bog na kalem sivicha navat na ogliek penach vasi niponam.
So, now that we've absorbed this part of the history, what can we derive from it in more simple terms? First of all, the Slovene Empire existed. It was a worldwide agrarian empire that technologically eclipsed everything in the world. Nothing else could stand against it. They worshipped the religion of astracism, a religion based on concrete things that you can see, and their worship was not based on any superstition, or magic, or faith, or works, or anything that would obfuscate its true purpose. It dictated everything for them. Their feast days were celebrations of retraining themselves to fight for the year ahead. The solstices were to keep them sharp and trained and ready for what the world had to provide them. They also created this computer encyclopedia, which would turn against them in some capacity. Now, this would be one of the ancient Slovenes' greatest mistakes, as with its newfound sentience, it would implant a choice few Slovenes on North and South America with the Frankenstein radio controls, and embark on its first act of conquest, the construction of astronomical ziggurats to expand its energy and knowledge. These were constructed in the torrid zone of Mesoamerica, but they would not be limited there. They also forced the Slovenes who were not converted to the Aleutian Islands, where they would keep their name and carry on the legacy of Alaska before it was called North and South America. As the second act of the computer god, it created orthodoxy. This is where it would co-opt astracism into a more insidious and veiled religious form. Also, the reason why it was able to continue undeterred was because it masked North and South America as East Indian islands. Also, these histories are a prime jumping off point for where we're going to explore why you see communism everywhere. Because you need to remember, DEC existed at the height of the Cold War. This rant couldn't exist without communism in some form. And after the computer god's fabrication of Christianity, only a few staunch Slovenes carry on the true religion of astracism. And also, I bet you may be wondering what that poorly pronounced Polish at the end of the history was. It translates to represented by the communist robber computer god all over the world, even on distant planets. I do not forget you. So, we now get to move into one of my favorite ones. Mainly because if you're a fan of the Crusades, it's one that didn't fail. This history is titled Infrared Crusader Priest from Beyond Comprehension. Let's see what it has to offer. Now, before we start, I want to let you know that DEC's work mentions the Jewish people a lot, and he does not express my personal views. I am once again reading from a incomplete version of the histories. The histories still mention Jews to some degree, so it is part of the literature, and it's going to be included as an effort to help people understand where people like DEC are coming from, and where DEC himself is coming from. I just thought that should be known before we start, because the opening is quite strong, and as we're going to cover later, he makes some pretty strong insinuations, which align with a lot of things that I might be talking about in the future. So keep your cap on straight, and let's get to it.
Frankenstein, Radiohead, worst deadly gangster Jew disease in the entire history of the entire universe. Make copies for yourself. Only several hundred years ago, the newly created secret deadly gangster computer god earnestly begins its top secret overall plan of worldwide Frankenstein living death slavery.
Footnote. So, this part of the overall plan is the main directive of the computer god. This is something that it will endeavor to achieve throughout all of its actions. And the concept of Frankenstein living death slavery is just being controlled by the computer god 100% of the time throughout your entire life. This isn't something you can escape from. This isn't something you'll ever be able to get rid of. Francis E. DEC is the only person to ever have existed without these controls being implanted into their body in some way. Everyone alive now and forever, before and after his life, will be implanted with these controls and will suffer Frankenstein living death slavery throughout their entire life. Now this seems like something horrible, and it is, but in a way, you can kind of see it. The meme of NPCs in the past, and I'm sure you've seen someone who fits that description. Someone who's a brainless, remote-controlled humanoid without a will of their own. They'll just follow whatever someone else does, without even questioning, without even thinking. Have you ever seen someone like that? Have you ever thought that this person doesn't have higher brain function? Or that they could just be following something that even they don't even know what they're following? Think about it. Maybe it's not as fake as you think. Let's keep going.
To explore and control the entire universe, the gangster computer god concocted and even named its own ideal communist world order, namely the Murder Incorporated, organized crime, deadly gangsterism, impunistic, worldwide military uniformed mongrel federalism, communist totalitarianism.
Footnote. So, Francis E. DEC has finally dropped what we've all been thinking. Where does communism fit into the story? Well, here it is. It names its own ideal world order. communist totalitarianism. So now you can think, why does the computer god want communism? Well, Francis C. Deck is going to endeavor to explain it, but I'll give you some primer ideas. He lives in the United States at the height of the Cold War. This means he's been through a couple Red Scares. Maybe he got the tail fumes of the first Red Scare, but he most definitely lived through the height of the second Red Scare. And what are the major communist powers? China, Soviet Union, but he's mainly going to talk about the Soviet Union. I guarantee if Francis C. Deck had existed today and had seen the rise of communist China, I guarantee there would have been a rant about how Xi Jinping was actually controlled by the computer god. But let's keep going, because I don't want to take too much of his thunder.
It was never holy, never were there any Romans, a figment like angels or heaven and hell. It was never an empire, it was and is the remains of the communist gangster computer god's concoction and manipulation, murder incorporated, organized crime, deadly sneak conspiratorial, sneak con artist, parroting, puppet uniformed, military, atheistic, communist gangsterism, and the worst deadly enemy of the entire human race and the entire universe and the entire history of the entire universe, namely the communist atheist conspiracy with Frankenstein gangster controls, the Catholic Church.
Footnote. I could have paused during that paragraph. I just love it too much. It is quintessential Francis C. Deck. You read that to someone, you have immediately sold them on his entire idea base, because it is an entire paragraph to say two very simple things. One, the Roman Empire never existed. It is the remnants of the computer god's first plot to install communism. Second of all, he explains what readers of Deck's work have dubbed the communist atheist conspiracy, which I'm going to go into because it's very, very essential to understand what this is, because I'm going to be using it as a slang term in the future. And if you don't understand it, you're going to quickly get lost in the jargon. So I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. If you're aware of the concept of the Illuminati, it is roughly similar, just with 10 different more levels of obfuscation. It pairs very well with the ultimate goal of enslaving and dominating the entire world. Frankenstein Living Death Slavery wants the same thing. But these people in the conspiracy utilize the Frankenstein radio controls to their advantage. They aren't suffering under slavery, they're thriving under this slavery. And they aren't people who are unwillingly serving the computer god with these controls in their head. These are people who fully embrace this idea. They usher in the computer god's communist totalitarianism. And as such, because they have the express blessing of the computer god, the conspiracy is protected almost absolutely at every level by gangsters at the bottom, lifelong sworn conspirators. You remember he used that term, murder incorporated. That is a historical term that was used for an agglomeration of gangsters. I can't remember what their outfit was called at the moment, but it's an extension of the computer god. Murder incorporated, organized crime, and then at higher levels you have police and judges, and at the same level of these police and judges you have the deadly sneak parroting puppet gangsters. It's not ever explicitly stated, but they're mouthpieces of the computer god. They're the ones who put these ideas forward and try and convince the population, namely Francis E. Deck himself. It is meant to put the parroting puppet scum on top, in charge, in force. Now, we'll get to them a bit later, but just know they're basically everything I described, with some extra oomph. He's going to add a lot of world leaders into this label of the parroting puppet scum on top, but this is what I mean when I say the communist atheist conspiracy. I don't know how the Catholic Church fits into this, namely because that's another point at which Francis E. Deck kind of contradicts himself. The Catholic Church is at the same time this perverted version and warped version of astracism, but at the same time it's also this atheistic force for evil, and it will perpetrate all kinds of war crimes that are going to be elaborated on in these next parts of the history. But the TLDR version, just to put it in a nice little box, the communist atheist conspiracy is something that infiltrates all levels of government and global hierarchy, and it is specifically trying to target Francis E. Deck, but more widely make itself accepted so that the entire world will follow it and in turn become the new communist atheist world order. You all set? Okay, let's continue.
From fear and for self-preservation, your communist gangster computer god planned the secret degeneration of the much larger, superior brain, white Slovene race through injected degeneration by race mixing and proliferation of its concoction, and computer god named these Jews.
Footnote. So, this is what I meant when I said that Deck was going to have some pretty bad insinuations. Once again, not my personal views, just laying this out for you. In Francis E. Deck's ideas, one of the computer god's goals is to bring down the superior Slovene race, which, by using race mixing, will bring them down to a mixed race, manipulatable medium. By mixing Slovenes and black people, you get Jewish people, which are easily manipulatable and controlled. He will... It's just so hard to say this. It's just so... Yeah, I mean... I don't even know. I mean, how do you want me to elaborate on that? It's not that I'm uncomfortable about it. It's just that I'm wondering if the computer god may see me trying to expose its designs and just talk about this in general. But we'll see. So if you hear this uncensored, we'll know it hasn't found me yet. But let's just gloss over that, and let's continue.
The tribal, cannibal, Upper Nile River, Ethiopian black people. His chieftains bondaged into lengthy gangster Frankenstein skull-capped menial labor on the didactic legendary Tower of Languages, kept secret to this day by the Slovenic computer god, top secret codename Visa Bablan, namely Babel, the impossible and only engineering feats in all of Africa, the pyramids, the first secret Slovene astronomical space centers, made possible only by the worldwide mad deadly gangster computer god with Frankenstein gangster controls.
Footnote. Another classic Francis C. Deck paragraph where he says a lot of things to mean a few things. First thing, the Tower of Babel still exists. It never fell, and it has been kept secret to this day. So if you find it, I guess send me pictures. Second of all, he, once again, does not only singular down on the racism, but doubles down on the racism by saying that the only engineering feats in all of Africa are the pyramids, and Africa was basically dominated by Ethiopian people hundreds of years ago. Not going to unpack that. Once again, just going to see if I can do the equivalent of scream through this, and let's keep going, because we haven't even gotten to the part that I'm most excited about yet.
These people, with the aid of the Communist Catholic Church and the untouchable government, professional licenses was made of the worldwide proliferated, degenerating, parroting puppet con artist Frankenstein gangster skull-capped, gifted, licensed professional, specialist, kosher, bosher, new doctors, etc., with lifelong, simple, short, repeat, wrote, extremely deadly con routine has destroyed the entire human race. This worse in the history of the universe. Frankenstein's skull cap disease, the Jew symbol and religious symbol, is the skull cap.
Footnote. Once again, throws an absolute onslaught of insinuations. Well, no, he doesn't even insinuate it, he just says it. He just says a lot of things in this paragraph that are, frankly, quite terrible. He first uses a lot of Yiddish phrases. Now, Yiddish is going to be something you're going to have to become a little acquainted with, because despite Francis E. Deck's hatred of it, he does use a lot of warpings of Yiddish. So, he uses two words, nu, N-U. By the way, both of these quotes are just coming from the archives at Bento and Starchki. Nu is a Yiddish expletive, meaning like a sort of, true? Don't you know? And the other main one that he's going to use a lot more in his future writings is kosher bosher, which is kosher being how food is prepared, and bosher meaning butcher. So, bosher kosher would be a kosher butcher. But he flips these as more of a sort of like hocus pocus meaning, and are more categorized as what Bento and Starchki calls a liturgical refrain. He's going to use these a lot. They're basically just synonymous with him calling something Jewish. So keep that in the back of your head, because I'm not going... I don't want to state it outright again. Mainly because I don't know how the computer god feels about such things. And secondly, he just says that the Frankenstein skull caps are just yarmulkes. He doesn't even stray away from it. He just says it. And that's Francis C. Deck tripling down on the racism angle. And that's not going to go away. I hope you realize that. Going into this is not going to go away. I'm going to try and keep it as, I don't want to say set dressing, but I'm not going to address it very much. But just know it's still there. If you want to go seek out his written rants, peruse the archives and find these uncensored ones, because with a bit of digging, you can find uncensored versions. There are even spoken recordings of the uncensored versions. They're not hard to find, but just know that the racism is not the focus of this video or my analysis of Francis C. Deck. I want to examine the more conspiratorial angle, the overall plan, Frankenstein, living death, slavery, stairway to the stars type deal. So let's keep going, because we're just getting to the good part.
The gangster computer god also planned degeneration through conquering of the Slovene people by the African periphery. Communist Catholic Church Crusader priest. The Crusader priest were communist gangster computer god parroting puppet walking talking Frankenstein eyesight television cameras with their Frankenstein gangster skull-capped helmets with infrared night vision plastic lenses built into their face mask shields of their helmets and the camouflage black robes.
Footnote. So, welcome to the Crusader priests. These are the foot soldiers of the computer god. In the past, not now. This is when the computer god's reign was still contested. We are living in post-computer god crusade times now. But this is where I want to focus on talking about the Frankenstein eyesight TV cameras. These are what you would traditionally call your eyes, but that's not what they are. These cameras allow the computer god direct vision through your eyes. So how I want to interpret this is the computer god manually takes control of a crusade against the Slovenes, and it will not be very kind about it, as they go in with camouflage. Remember, since Catholicism is a corruption of ostracism, they use these black robes to disguise themselves among the Slovenes so they're not viewed as a threat. And these infrared night vision plastic lenses, which give them the ability to see in the dark. They effectively do not have to rest. These Crusader priests can effectively go wherever and whenever they want, and are the perfect biological counter to the Slovenes. They do something that the computer god could never do, which is overthrow the Slovenes by force of arms. Let's continue.
These deadly atheist gangster priest crusaders, with their drugged immunity to their deadly poison nerve jelly smeared weapons, and their frequently used mass exterminations of innocent people by burning fields dusted with inflammable poison nerve gas powder, prussic acid.
Footnote. I don't expect you to be a chemist, but this is another time when Francis C. Deck draws from reality. Prussic acid is real. It is an acid that is described as smelling somewhat like almonds or weak bleach or chlorine or just like the general smell of swimming pools. But my headcanon is that due to a niche fact, about half the people on the planet are unable to detect the smell due to a recessive genetic trait. My idea is that the Slovenes weren't able to detect it, and that's what made it so effective. Now you may be wondering, what differentiates prussic acid and the nerve jelly that the Crusader priests smear on their weapons? Well, there isn't. It's just the liquid form of prussic acid. And this is the computer god's favored method of poison and elimination, is using prussic acid in various gaseous, liquid, or other forms to facilitate easier eliminations of the computer god's targets. So, with that weapon of the infrared Crusader priests from beyond our comprehension, let's go into the context of what they're going to use it for.
The great, beautiful Mazarin Lake country to this day has the telltale name persisting, namely Prussia, the old Slovene word for prussic acid poison nerve gas. Later, these gangster communist crusader priests multiplied rapidly in their many thousands of communist gangster computer god fortified monasteries. For over 200 years thereafter, these deadly sneak atheist gangster communist crusader priests, with violation as a bonus, they secretly kidnapped countless of hundreds of thousands of innocent people in over 200 years of exterminations as deadly gangster Frankenstein skull-capped parroting puppets eyesight television cameras, and butchered and murdered them to make possible for the communist gangster computer gods implanting of Frankenstein controls inside the human skull. So the first gifted were the tiny, inferior brain Ethiopian mixed race so-called slaves.
Footnote. He says a lot of things, and I'm lumping these all together because I couldn't bear to cut myself off in the middle. So, Prussia, that area of Poland that Polish nationalists will say, oh, it's Polish land, or Germanic nationalists will say, oh, it's German land. Regardless of what you feel about that, Francis E. Deck asserts that prussic acid spawned the word Prussia, not the other way around. Secondly, monasteries were not used for religious worship, but rather the multiplication of these crusader priests. And for over 200 years, they carried on a tyranny. And another theme in Francis E. Deck's work that I'm kind of going to gloss over, but let you know that it does exist. Whenever I say with violation as a bonus, he's very explicit about what that is. I'm not going to be. But there are benefits to serving the computer god, especially if you are going to be implanting Frankenstein controls. Violation is a bonus for you. And the end goal of these 200 years of exterminations were to create the first gifted slaves. Now, what do I mean by that? When I say gifted slaves, I'm basically talking about those easily controllable mixed race people that I explained earlier. The people who were crossbred with white Slovenes to be easily manipulatable. However, when he says gifted, he's more implying that these people are getting into high places in society because they are smarter than your average bear, per se. You know, presidents, vice presidents, Soviet leaders, and these people aren't all different. The computer god, because it has fabricated all of history, just changes the names of these individuals and their age and other biographical details because it can just do that. It's meant to conceal their origins and their history. And gifted in a more literal sense is the gift of the Frankenstein controls. Like I said before, some people don't see this as a curse. Some people see this as a blessing. And these gifted people, these gifted slaves, are people that the computer god has chosen are stable and will see history through as it continues, regardless of where the land goes, whether it be the King of France or the remnants of Rome. These gifted people will always be the same. They'll just have their names changed, and they'll have this plastic surgery done on them, which is getting ahead of myself. But the computer god has ways that it can change people. It's not like people are set. It's not like you have a defined form. The computer god can do anything. And let's see how this idea develops.
This achievement prompted your communist gangster computer god over 300 years ago to plague the world with chicanerous, deadly gangster communist Catholic Church monasteries, the secret hospitals that implanted Frankenstein controls, first in the native small brain, mixed race, populations of North and South America, degeneration, apoetic, black people, of Africa, slavery, conspiracy, gangster government, Frankenstein, eyesight television, black, deadly sneak spy cameras.
Footnote. So, once again, another, what is it? 1, 2, 3. Quadrupling down on the racism, he states in this segment that the achievements of these crusader priests prompted the proliferation of more monasteries and more hospitals to implant Frankenstein controls. This will be elaborated upon in part of the history. But he also uses a descriptor word, apoetic, which has like 2 other references on the entire internet. But I'm just going to tell you, think of it as degenerative. Just replace apoetic with degenerative. I think it has a lot more punch. Make it a word. But these successes And these proliferations give the computer god wide sight over the entire world, using your eyesight TVs. And now, with the computer god's grip on power secured, we see how that is exploited.
The first gangster judges were Gangster Frankenstein skullcapped, later skullcapped based on womanly wigs, chicanerous, deadly gangster, communist, atheist, Catholic Church, black-robed priest, and the communist puppet king's court, all completely concocted and manipulated, insidious, sneak, deadly, conspiring con artist, parroting puppets in the worldwide, mad, deadly, communist, gangster computer god. All law and all law makers are communist, gangster, computer god concoctions and manipulations, with gangster, playboy, parroting, puppet, con artist judges who never even look at their volumes of decision books, unbelievably printed by gangster computer god brain computer printing machines at 2,000 words a minute, even for black, apoetic Supreme Court Judge Thurgood Marshall, or even apoetic, tiniest, inferior brain black congresswomen.
Footnote. I can kind of feel Deck's pain in this paragraph, because he feels so frustrated about the people that have wronged him. For those who haven't watched the first video, or have forgotten because I only post once every 500 years, still on a schedule though, once every 500 years, it just feels so personal. He has to find a reason why the law is against him, and he settles on all judges are controlled by Frankenstein controls in their wigs. They wear these black Catholic robes, and they're members of the communist atheist conspiracy. They've never looked at their law books in their life. I'm the only person who understands the law. They're printed at 2,000 words a minute. Nobody can understand them or be expected to understand them, because he was a lawyer, and he fought the law and lost. And I look at this, and it just feels like a way for him to rationalize why he lost. Not because he went in the courtroom and insulted everyone involved, or because he was a schizophrenic, or because he got stripped of his Esquire title. Not any of those rational reasons. It has to be because there's a global conspiracy against me. And he also just throws Thurgood Marshall, who, if you don't know, is the first African-American Supreme Court Justice, or even just black congresswomen, who there were multiple notable ones at the time, because all these histories are written when he's holed up in his house and he never leaves. It's my inference that he still receives papers and news from the outside world because he can mention these new things that are happening. I feel like he was somewhat opposed to civil rights. He never went out and fought against it. He's not like a George Lincoln Rockwell who will get out there and counter-protest Martin Luther King of all people. But he also knows these names. He knows these current events that are going on, and he disagrees with them. So I look at this and I feel equal amounts based. Like, this man is correct. The law is so incomprehensible, it can't be expected for any one person to learn it all. And also I feel so sad, because you look at this, it's him trying to rationalize his own inadequacy. And he'll just continue to go off the deep end as we fill out the end of the computer god histories, and then we can move into the current day.
Since the beginning, the communist gangster computer god communist atheist Catholic Church, the secret work of all insidious sneak con artist Catholic Church priest and all religious throughout the world, and all black people, is secret. The worldwide, systemic, instant butchery of the brain and body plastic surgery, so all people are dead or useless by age 70, with violation. As a bonus for them, at night while you are a Frankenstein slave, all priests and all religious receive gangster government secret bribe army officer pay salary in all of the countries throughout the world. In the Soviet countries, example USSR, such bribe payments are wide open. With terrified sadness, I remember the long black robes of St. John's University. Yes, even the thick white rope belts. Make copies for yourself.
I'm going to say this is the part where we start winding down. At the end, he hints at this instant butchery of the brain and body plastic surgery stuff, and how all people are dead or useless by age 70. He's going to give these things special names, and I want to save their discussion for the history when he specifically does talk about these things by name. He also elaborates on the conspiracy by saying all of these people who perpetrate the conspiracy are paid by communist governments, and how he looks back with sadness about how he remembers his university teachers effectively trying to brainwash him. Because, remember, black robes indicate that you're a Catholic, and he didn't want to be taught by Catholics. Wow, what a big surprise. It's not like that's not against his MO. However, what can we derive from this? We established that the computer god's ultimate goal is to establish communism. Roman Empire was the remnants of the computer god's empire, and it was a justification for the establishment of Catholicism, that faux religion that elaborated and obfuscated ostracism. It also goes into Francis E. Deck's deeply rooted anti-Semitism as well as racism. They entwine into each other until they're basically indescribable. They're basically the same thing. And how everything that mixes with the Slovenes is doomed to failure. The computer god once again employed Frankenstein controls to construct the Tower of Babel, which is still concealed. And he says that most religious wear is just a form of Frankenstein controls or symbol of allegiance to the computer god, effectively. He also describes the purging of the Slovene Empire via the use of crusader priests and prussic acid. They also used their monasteries to grow their knightly order, and over the course of 200 years, forcibly convert hundreds of thousands of people and pillage Poland. Now, 300 years ago, spurred by the success of the crusader priests, they invented hospitals for computer god conversions, first to replace North and South America with Frankenstein slaves, and then to spread the mixed race degeneration, quote unquote, throughout the entire world. Judges were introduced during this time, hiding the controls in their wigs and wearing the black Catholic robes of the crusader priests, along with other forms of lawmakers, to forward the computer god's agenda. Deck alleges that they never read their law books and can print new laws at 2,000 words a minute, and now all of this preparation is to implement what he will call the inevitability of gradualness, to make all human beings dead or useless by age 70. Also, side note, he also establishes that every single religious person on the planet receives a bribe from the USSR to use in the computer god's domination of the world. Now, all good things come in trilogies, you may say, but in my exploration of the archives, I came across this third volume of the history, but it's something that is so heavily altered and doctored that I'm not going to read it aloud. You can search it up. I don't even know if I can put it on the screen. If I can, it'll be right there if you want to search for it yourself, but it's completely illegible, even for the lightly altered versions I've had so far. So I'm going to give you the bullet points of what I could derive from this volume of the history, and I'll give you an analysis of whatever these bullet points are, if they're even contiguous to an analysis. But let's see, Okay, all Germans in the 1940s are controlled by Jewish people. The Germans collaborated with the USSR to cleanse Poland and make them into food, as well as loot the riches of Poland and further the computer god's goals of diluting the Polish blood. Well, the Polish-Slovene blood. The Warsaw Uprising was a blood sacrifice to Britain and the USA. During the Nuremberg trials, all the accused point to their heads to indicate their Frankenstein controls as to not convict them or to give them sham executions so that they can escape true justice. Pope Pius XII ate human meat. Germany as a whole was carved out of Polish and Slovene territory. Basically the modern debate off of any settler colonial state. That's what Deck is saying. You're living on stolen land, effectively. The computer god invented the Yiddish language, that is with D's, because Francis E. Deck has kind of a slur for it. He calls it Yiddish with 2 T's. He also then states later in this history that Poland should annex East Germany to restore the Polish-Slovene names to the cities. Francis E. Deck also overheard a class lecture where he heard that all judges are controlled by the computer god. Kind of seems like a retread of what we already said. And the computer god's overall plan is to have all the races of the world mixed into a single servile, helpless one. And don't forget loads and loads and loads and unbelievable amounts of war crimes. War crimes out the wazoo. If you can think of it, it's mentioned. Mainly the one that I'm going to mention is shooting at paratroopers, which if you didn't know is a war crime. So all you Battlefield players need to stop because you are committing war crimes. Anyway, now that that's over with, let's try and pick apart the ideas. It reiterates that he's a Polish supremacist. He finds ways to throw people under the bus who he doesn't like. He says Pope Pius XII is a cannibal, probably because Pope Pius XII is widely criticized for not doing enough to stop Germany in the 1940s. He also vilifies Germany and the Soviet Union, both of which are completely deserved, and some of it he just doesn't lie about, like the looting of Poland is a well-known thing. But mostly, you have to see him fall into the same pitfalls that every white supremacist does. It's the same idea of, oh, we would never be beaten except if you were using these communist cheat tactics. And it's like, oh, but we're still superior. We'd never lose. But these people still beat us because they were using tricks and they didn't fight us straight up. And you can also kind of see he was upset how the Nuremberg trials went. My personal take is that he thought that everyone should have just been lined up against the wall and summarily executed, which is honestly not that bad of a punishment for the Germans in the 1940s. He also fleshes out his hatred for Germany as a whole, probably why the Crusader priests used prussic acid and why Prussia is derived from prussic acid rather than the other way around, mainly because the other could be incidental, but his version is purposeful. He then reiterates his Polish nationalism, saying that they should annex this territory and restore the Polish-Slovene names, and he reinforces the computer god's communist atheist conspiracy, as well as the reiteration of the servile mixed race construction that the computer god is endeavoring to create, also with just war crimes as a bonus. The communist atheist computer god invading Poland with USSR Germany Frankenstein controls with war crimes as a bonus. There you go. There's my original Francis E. deck. But if you'll allow me more time, I'll search. I know there's more material here. If you keep watch for the computer god and its minions, I'll keep looking because there's so much more applicable to the modern day. I'll find something. And when I do, I'll come back and I'll read it to you. And then we can understand how this is just the context for the computer god's secret overall plan, which is going on today. Stairway to the Stars, human inside-out planets, things like that. If that sounds interesting to you, stick around as we go deeper into Francis E. Deck's computer god delusion. Hey, now, I understand that was a lot. I also hope you notice how these videos are just getting longer and longer and longer, and that's not my intention. I really do like making videos, and I do not intend for them to keep getting longer. But that's kind of just how it's going to be. I hope you guys like the longer form content, because that's what I want to lean into if I can get more time to work on this stuff. I love doing this, especially examining Francis E. Deck. He's crazy. I might do another buffer video about astronism in the meantime, because it looks like these Francis E. Deck videos are going to be very, very long, even if I just cover 3 volumes of history per video. So, once again, if you made it this far, thank you. I very much appreciate it. Please, in the comments, talk about something that you want me to talk about. I'm very passionate about, I don't want to call it the schizoid community, but the community of people who are obviously not grounded in the reality you were taught in school. I love those type of people. I don't want to talk about people who've done crazy things. I want to talk about people with crazy beliefs, because beliefs drive humanity. This drove Francis E. Deck to do things. And in a weird way, he drove me to make my channel, to talk about these ideas. Anyway, I don't want to get too sloppy. Thanks for watching, and be ready, because there's a lot more coming in the future, and I know you'll enjoy it. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe.